Okay, we got a live broadcast going. I'm going to bring in that Joy dependency into my MERN stack app. Let me paste the live stream URL into Discord for my class to follow along on YouTube. So if you want to rewind, you can follow along on YouTube and you can rewind with that live stream, or just watch my live stream on Discord for live. That's up to you. The URL for the repo is right here. If I control click that URL, it should open up in the browser. And there's the public repo. It's got 7 commits so far. And if I do a pull, tortoise get pull, just showing you that I am up to date with the current state of affairs. I'm up to date with my GitHub repo. And if I just open this up, this has been deployed to my G Cloud. And so one thing that I'm doing is maintaining G Cloud. I'm maintaining the live version of this with my current version. In other words, I should be able to go to G Cloud and everything should be current. If I hit my URL for the app, this should boot up, and what we have, because of these 2 bullets right here, I can tell this is a full stack app. I've obviously got React on the front end, and I know those 2 users are coming out of my database, so I know it's hitting the API. React is using Axios to hit the API, kind of in the middle tier, and that middle tier is calling on the database. And that's kind of just where it is right now. We got some API endpoints for our users, and G Cloud's up to date. This is a mono repo, meaning the back end is in the same folder as the front end. So I've got a front end React app folder here, and a back end package JSON. Let me kind of zoom in so you could see the code a little bit more clearly. And because I'm working with Joy and I'm in the back end, the first thing I'll do is I'll install that dependency. And while I'm at it, I'm going to open up the joy.dev docs and see if I need to use these docs as I'm going through. Now, yesterday I kind of wrote a lot of similar code, so I'm going to be porting over the code I wrote yesterday into this because, well, it was pretty similar. So it's a good thing you guys will see this for a second time going through the steps. So what I did yesterday is I made in the root, I made a folder for middleware. And I made another folder for, not a subfolder of middleware, but I'm in the root, validation. And so I'm going to put my schemas inside this validation folder. And the middleware, this is where I will actually call the validate function. And so here inside of my validation folder, we're going to create a new file called userschema.js. And this is going to be where we define the Joy schema. And so we'll start by importing Joy. And this is verbatim what I brought in yesterday for the user schema. And I was referencing the Mongo, like the users that were already in my database, my users that were already in my database had an email, a password, confirm password. Now confirm password, I just had that for show yesterday. Of course, it's a pretty good idea to have the user type their password twice. Although you don't need to save the confirm password in the database. So, of note there, we had a role that's either customer or provider, an optional profile, and a created app. And I export that schema. So just to kind of get started here, we installed the dependency, we defined a schema, and then we're going to use a middleware function to validate that schema. And so I'm going to make a new file here, and I'm just going to call this joy validator.js, because there's other validators that are out there. I'm just going to name this one joy validator. And this is going to be a middleware function, and I kind of mentioned this yesterday. The syntax, and write a function called validate that takes in a schema and returns what's called an express middleware function. So we're taking in our schema, and then we return with the arrow function request object, response object, and the next method. Now in Joy, there were some options that we passed in. And so as I walk through this, if you remember yesterday when we were working with Joy, the first error that it found, it just reported that singular error. But if you want multiple errors to come up, then you want to pass in this abort early of false. And that's going to get all the validation errors into that details array that we'll see here in a little bit. So abort early. And then these two together says, hey, don't allow unknown keys. So a user can't put some like unknown field. An end user can't say, okay, a user has a admin property equal to true. There is no admin property. So do not allow an admin property. And if it's there, remove it. Right? So these two are kind of very similar in nature and what they do. They just don't allow kind of like some sort of injection attack, some sort of attacker to add properties to your object. And then what we do is we call the joy validate function. So here, schema dot validate, right? So this is the function that returns one of two things. It returns our clean data as value, or it returns an error object that contains details array of listing all of our different errors. And then we say, hey, if there's an error, and so I'll kind of write this, if error is truthy, we read the error message, and then return 400 status message. So we're going to return to the client, return res status 400.json and there's a status property. The status is error. The type is validation failed. The message, invalid data submitted. See details for errors. Details is our concatenated string. It's our string full of maybe one error message, maybe there's 5 error messages, but it has all of the error messages in it. And so we do two things. We do the keyword return because that breaks us out of this validate function. And there's no potential to like hit another response, right? So you guys might have seen this if your endpoints potentially have multiple responses sent back. Like if you have an if statement with the response object in it, and then no else block, or you just have another response object underneath that, sending two different responses back to the client, that often ends with an error message. So we do a return. That way you break out of the method and you're not going to hit a second response back to the client. Otherwise, we update the body object, rec.body equals value. Rec.body equals value. And then when you're done with the middleware function, it is the convention of middleware functions to call the next function in line with the next method. So this next method, if there's another middleware function in line, it goes to the next one in line. Otherwise, it just goes to the express route handler. It just goes to the express route. Okay, so now we've got a method here to export, and I do a named export with the validate function in it. We're exporting this function to be used by our express route. Let's go into our index.js now. We have a couple of imports to do. Import register schema from the validation folder, user schema.js. That looks like a correct path. Let's also import our, I think it's a validate function from joyvalidator.js. So now we have a validate function and a schema to check against. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not doing that here. I need to go into my users module and bring these things in. Let me back up here. Let's go into users, routes, users. Okay, so there's my register schema, there's my validate. Let's take that out. And this is on my posting a new user route. The way that we can call this is validate with our register schema, comma. So I just want to remind you guys of a little bit of theory on anything that's called a middleware function. Middleware functions are any functions that run between the request made by the client and the response that goes out from the server. And they have access to the request object and they have access to the response object. So you'll notice in here, I can actually write to rec.body. I can read from rec.body. I can read from the rec.params or the rec.query string. Like I can work with the request object and the response object, and I can modify them. I can put things in them. I could read things out of them. In this case, we are modifying the entire rec.body. Okay, so now that I've got this middleware on here, when I go to register a new user, the question is, okay, like we're ready to test this, let's test it. So I'm going to do a run dev script on my back end. Now I'm running on localhost, and I've just have okay, it changed the path, right? So now this path is all different. I need to go up a directory, up another directory, down a directory, user schema.js. Because I moved these files, the pathing changed to get to those files. Up a directory, up another directory. Okay, so change those paths, and now I get my app up and running on localhost. So here I'm on localhost 8080 API users, and I've got an email, a password, a role created at. And this should be hitting my database, right? This data. So if I send that over, it says validation failed, confirm password is required. Well, that's good. That's what I would expect. And let's go ahead and send in a confirm password. And now this is a Joy validation. Let's just do that, and let's see that it's still confirm password must be ref password. Now, I understand that. That's probably not what you're going to show an end user. But nonetheless, because the passwords don't match, Joy is not passing validation. And now, let's see what it does. Okay, now it looks like 201 created. And if I go into my database, Bob at doncan.com should be a new user in my database. And as a demonstration of that, okay, there he is with this hash password. Okay, now, great. That's what we did yesterday. Like in summary, 10 minutes redoing it. That's what we did yesterday. There's more to it. One thing you might realize if you hit the Joy docs is there's no object ID, like a Mongo object ID. And so there's like a use case right now. If I go, for example, and I could do this on my G-Cloud requests, right? So let's go to update a user, right? And here I was updating the profile object on my user. Well, notice as part of the URL right there, that is the object ID for my user. And if I leave that 7 off and I put a 1 character short, even, I get a server error, right? That's actually, I don't know if that, hopefully that didn't crash the app on my server. But the point is if it's object IDs are a certain number of characters, and all you have to do is not provide the right number of characters, and boom, our server is crashing. That's not what we want. Now, if I send it again, it says user not found. That's more appropriate. So instead of giving a 500 server crash, I'd probably want a better, like 500 internal server error, right? I'd rather catch that in some sort of validation logic and not give a 500 server error. So one thing I know we asked for on the labs is to validate IDs, right? At least give me something that looks like a valid Mongo ID, right? So the next thing I'll do is I'll go into my middleware, and I'm just going to write another file called valid ID. Okay, and this is going to be my my validation logic, it's going to be a middleware function to test for Mongo IDs. Okay, and I think there's probably room for improvement on my code here, but let me go ahead and bring in the snippet here for my valid ID. And I put it in text yesterday, so let me go ahead and so the first thing that we do is let's import the object ID from MongoDB. This is the MongoDB driver. It's a dependency that we installed last week. I have no idea. This looks way simpler than what I used to code. So let's look at this logic. Constant is valid ID. We send in a string, return true or false. Export is valid ID. Now, I wrote something different. Because this just looks like it returns true or false. That should return true or false. That's not what I want to do. Here's what I'm going to do. Const valid ID. This is going to be a middleware function. They're doing some cleaning out there?
Yeah. They're doing floors or something.
All right, take a look at line 5 for me. This whole function is slightly more complicated. So we're writing an express middleware function, right? This is a function that returns an express middleware function, right? So it's a function that returns a function, right? That's that whole concept of JavaScript is functions are first-class citizens. First-class citizens. Functions can return functions. Functions can accept functions. You can store functions in variables, right? It's called functions are considered first-class citizens, and this is an example of that. Okay, so in this function, there's an input. It's the name of your parameter name. So there's one input variable, and here what we're doing on line 5 is we're creating a variable that belongs on the request object. So now you could say request dot ID. Now, so we'll probably, when we call this, we'll pass in a string that is the ID. That will create a rec.id that holds the value of not a string ID, but a converted to Mongo object ID, right? Because when we're taking in an ID from the front end, it's coming in as a string. We need to convert that to an object ID. We need to convert that to an object ID so that we can hit the database using the object ID. So this will store that object ID in a variable that is req. So in the express route, it'll be rec.id, for example. rec.id will be ultimately what that holds. Now, that's if you pass in the string of ID. And then we do we call that next function. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this in a try catch. I'm going to say try this code. And if it doesn't work, catch the error. And just send back parameter name was not a valid object ID. So I'm going to send back an error message that says, actually I'll just say error. Param name is not a valid object ID. So if for whatever reason it cannot convert that string into an object ID, it'll at least give us a 400 error instead of a 500 server crash. It's a 400 client side error, right? Whatever is not a valid object ID. Close that, and I probably need one more curly. Or do I? Let's see. Yeah, I do. And then I export valid ID. Okay. So this is on localhost. So let's go back to my users route. So I need to import valid ID from validid.js. I can call this as a middleware function. Now, I'm going to do this on my patch method. So notice the ID is a variable here. And I'm sending that ID variable that comes across in the URL. I'm sending that ID variable into my middleware function. Right? So realize this is called a route variable on line 57. It's available on rec.params. Now, check this out. This is a string, rec.params.id. Rec.id, I showed you guys this is the object ID. So now user ID, that's before it was a string, now I've actually got this converted into an object ID. So rec.id is a user ID. And now I'm sending in the user ID. Now check this out. This is actually going to change my update user function, because I bet you in my update user function, I bet you I was converting that string. See this right here? I was converting that string into an object ID right here, but that should already be converted now. So I can actually remove that, because user ID that's coming in, this should be formatted as an object ID. So here, this valid ID, this is on localhost. Let's boot up localhost. And here I was posting a new user. Let's make a new request. This was a patch. http://localhost:8080 API users / let's pull a user ID, this one that I just created. Okay, so let's just remove the 4. And I'm going to save this request as update user. Okay, now this should be an invalid object ID. And now I get the 400 bad request ID is not a valid object ID. I think you guys can all see the benefit of getting that specific error message over the 500 server crash, right? So this is a much cleaner error message. And if I give it a bad number here, now at least it's the right number of digits, so it is a valid object ID, but now I would expect it to say something like user not found. Now, Mongo server error modifiers operate on fields. We found null instead, so this is something to clean up. Obviously, if I give it a bad user ID, we would want something different there. But let's give it our good user ID. Let me paste in the good user ID. And let me go into the body, raw, JSON. And we made an optional let me go here. This is Bob Duncan. Rating of 4. So I'm going to put this profile object on our user, and we're getting a success message here. If I go back to our database and refresh, now I could see that our object has been updated. Okay, so I did want to show that part, how to make a valid ID. But also, you can now the next step is, okay, well, we've got a register schema. Let's make an update schema, const update user schema. And what might an update user schema look like? Let's see what it recommends. Everything is optional. Right? But at least you're defining the properties. You're defining the properties. Up here, when you're registering a user, it's required. But when you're updating a user, all of these fields become optional. Optional. Min of 1 is going to say, hey, you're at least updating one attribute. And the update user schema. Now, look, is this the perfect update user schema? I don't know. I'm going with it, okay? The point is, you have different schemas for different operations. Insert, update, for delete, you just probably need to validate the user ID. So now that I've got an update user schema, let's export that. Update user schema. And now we can bring that in. So here we can have multiple middleware functions. So let's call, we call the validate function. Let's bring in the update user schema. And let's pass that in to validate. So now we've got a schema for updating our user. We're making sure it's a valid Mongo ID. I probably need to write some logic because right now it's assuming it's a good ID, like right here. This is Bob Duncan, right? But I've got an error, or I've got a bug, we should call it, where if I pass in a 3 instead of a 4, okay, user not found. That's what I would expect. So let's refresh and let's make sure what's going on here. So there's our Bob Duncan. We're going to patch Bob Duncan, put an extra N. Okay. So now this validate update user. So now it's saying user not found when I put in this. So let's do a debug users. All right, let's send that over. And it says updating user with ID, with data, profile address, Bob Duncan, update result. So it actually gets into the update user. We have the user ID, which is a valid 226224. That is a current user ID. A little bit of troubleshooting here. With the data, profile, address. Oh, okay. The update actually did happen. It just gave me... Oh, because he already has the extra N on there. So there was really nothing to update. That's what's happening. So if I put another N on his name, send it over, now it says user updated successfully. What's happening is if you send it again, now it's saying user not found, but that's not the correct response. Let's fix that. I'll just say user not updated. User not found is not the right message. User not updated. This kind of making sense for you guys? Different schemas on different routes, validating your ID, validating your inputs. Okay, so last but not least, I didn't touch the front end, so I don't need to do anything with the front end. G-Cloud run deploy. Let's redeploy the current version to G-Cloud. Okay, got it nice and deployed. And then what I can do to test it is try and post a new user. So here's my add user. And let's just, we don't have the confirm password on here. So as we send that across, now we can get our joy validation error messages back from G-Cloud. And so that was nice and easy. And so now I've got some validation on adding new users and editing my users. Okay, and so that should be some good help for you guys in your labs and where you guys need to head. I'll go ahead and stop the live demo there.